What's up, Bucs fans? Back here again. It's the guy JC Allen on an episode of Pirate Parlay. Really interesting episode. There's going to be 3-4 mini episodes. We're going to be draft profiling some of the guys that the Bucs might pick at 26. I got John Vogel with me here, our resident draft expert, and today we're going to start with I think the most important position that the Bucs need to land in this draft, and that's probably edge rusher. They did bring in, if you're watching this, whatever day you're watching this, they brought in Randy Gregory recently to kind of bolster that room. That includes Yaya Diaby, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, as well as Marquise Watts, Anthony Nelson, and last year's 7th-round pick, Jose Ramirez. But they're still lacking that true top-tier number one guy. So I think edge rusher, even though they've addressed it, even though they've got some young players, it's still a big need for this Bucs team. And we'll get into one of the draft profiles of one of the prospects I really like and hope falls to that range right after this with John Vogel.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Pirate Parlay.
Battle intercepted, picked off in the end zone. Bucs are going to beat the Chiefs. We're the champions of the world.
The sickest Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. It's going to be sick.
Back at it here. Thanks for joining us today here on the Pirate Parlay. First up, before we get into the prospect analysis and breakdown, John, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into the meat and bones of this. The Bucs need an edge rusher. It's even if they still had Shaq Barrett, he's clearly lost a step. He's not the guy. They haven't had double-digit sack leaders since 2 years ago with Barrett, but even then, still hasn't looked the same. Still dominant as a run setter on the edge, but they really need someone who can get after the quarterback, who teams have to game plan week in and week out for each game of the week. And while I really like Yaya Diaby and his ability to come in as a rookie, start after week 10 and put up, the most sacks by any edge defender as a rookie last year, not counting Will Anderson. But I think that he really showed a lot. I think they still need someone there. So a guy I wanted to talk to about and get your perspective on, because you're the man. He's even wearing a Senior Bowl shirt. That's how you know how legit he is. So,
I don't know about
UCLA's Laiatu Latu. He just screams like a Todd Bowles fit, screams like a guy who can develop into a top tier. He's got the size at 6'5", 259, could stand to get a little bit more weight on him. But you look at everything else, 4.6 40. His 10-yard split was 1.62, which is, tells you everything you need. Good vertical, good broad jump, and the production to match it. There are some medical concerns about Latu, though, as well. But just your overall view of the player and his fit with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and a potential 3-4 defensive lineman.
Yeah, so you hit on all the combine drills, which was really good, right? And he tested well. That's a good start. The medicals is the big question mark with him, where, he medically retired from football at the University of Washington and comes back. Washington won't clear him to play, so he transfers to UCLA. They give him the okay. So it really depends what those medicals come back as. Is that something that's going to be lingering? Is that going to be a problem in the future? That's what teams are going to be trying to answer. And I think so far, from what I've heard, I don't think they're going to know for sure till closer to the draft when all that information and that data comes back. Latu is in a good spot right now as a first-round talent. So the one thing that kind of makes him, that separates him from a lot of these edge rushers, is his arsenal, the way that he attacks offensive linemen, the way he sets himself up. He's very, very well suited in his upper and lower body, being it synced so that he can get into a route and win it. The next thing he does really well is his hands, his hand finesse, the way that he attacks, the variety of moves that he brings. He knows how to handle different types of blockers, different types of sets. And so you're not worried about that either. And then with the athletic ability, you add to that on top of it. This is a guy that can be a number one edge rusher off the edge. Now, if you want to comp him to somebody, I think he tested very similarly, and he's built to Jermaine Johnson, who was a late first-round pick to the Jets a couple years ago. But this is a guy, he's got a great motor. He's a pretty darn good run defender. And then as a pass rusher, he's a guy that he has a bunch of, an arsenal, wide variety of ways to get past an offensive lineman and get in the backfield and disrupt the play.
Yeah, I think, the red flag there is medically retired. He had to medically retire Washington would not let him step back on the football field. He transferred to UCLA, gets that clearance from the doctors, and just had incredible production. I think it was 24 sacks over the last 2 seasons.
Mhm.
He's been able to really get at the quarterback, and like you said, it's not just one thing. He doesn't really just excel with a rip move. He doesn't just excel with a stab move. It's multiple things: slaps, swats, rips, counters, like. He's got so many different moves he can beat you with. And the thing about Latu is he's so seasoned. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of room for growth potentially in the NFL because he's already what you want out of a pass rusher. He knows how to set guys up throughout the game. He knows how to use angles to suit his pass rush plan. He knows how to set guys up. He's such an explosive pass rusher that I no doubt could see him become a Pro Bowl level talent, even be better than what Jermaine Johnson is. But the medicals are something that's really going to get some teams hung up. And the only reason why I'm even talking about him at potentially a player at 26 that the Bucs could get, just concern it is for those medicals, and how likely do you see him being able to fall to 26 the way the Bucs are selecting?
It's all on the medicals at this point. And so the thing with when you have an extensive test that has to be done, a lot of times you don't get those results back till a week or 2 before the draft. So I think teams right now are kind of waiting, to see what those things look like. I'll give you another example of a guy, Peyton Wilson, in this class. I know for a fact they're not going to have his medical report back until a week before the draft. Speaking with different scouts and getting that information. So I think Latu's in a very similar situation with the extensive tests that they ran to kind of figure out, okay, why was he asked to medically retire? Why wouldn't Washington bring him back? Why did he have to go to another school? Did they clear? Was it a good clearing, or was it kind of one of those, yeah, you're good
You're
kind
fine.
of things, And that's kind of the question here with him at this point. But from, I think an upside, he could build up his lower half a little bit more. There's a little bit of room there, where he could put another 5 pounds in his thighs, in that type of area, and start to really improve on that lower body strength, because he's got a good bull, rush and power type skill set. He could improve it a little bit better, and he could improve his hand usage and make it just a little bit more consistent. But these are nitpick things, so that when we get him to that point, if he can take those little steps in those little areas of his game, now we're talking about an elite type talent, a top 5, top 10 edge rusher in the NFL.
Right. And you look at a guy like Latu and a defense like the Bucs run with Todd Bowles. He has guys to do everything. You're not just, one trick pony in his scheme. Hell, he's had last year, he had Kalijah Kancey and Anthony Nelson as stand-up linebackers. He's done it with Vita Vea. He's had Levante down as a 3-tech. And he often asks his outside linebacker edge rushers to drop back in coverage. And that's one area where I think Latu doesn't get enough credit. Now he's not amazing. He couldn't be a nickel, a big nickel, but one of his areas that he does perform well is in coverage and technique like that, specifically speaking about Bowles defense. And I'm not sure how much you know about it, but where do you think his fit is within this defense? Obviously, in a traditional 3-4, which is projected most to have the most success in as that 3-4 edge rusher. Bowles does a lot more with less and a lot more creative things in that defense than most defensive coordinators run that, especially that run that 3-4.
Well, I think, we're going to be talking about him as I think he can play the defensive end role. They've got one of their defensive ends that is typically a little bit lighter. And I think he can play the outside linebacker role, so I think he can kind of move around 3-5 tech. I do think he has that ability, and his first step is a huge part of that. If you can win off your first step, command the rep, coming off of that, you can play 3 tech. And so he can do all that. I'm not worried so much about that. Now, if you want to look at the size and the measurables and those different things, the way people tested, he's built very, very, very similarly to Joe Shoyinka, right? Where we're talking about a 6'5", 260-pound talent that has 34-inch arms and ran the 4.6 40, and all those different things. They're very similar in the way that they tested athletically, the way that they're built. And so while it's probably more ideal that he ends up in, that outside linebacker role where you really want to use him after getting after the quarterback and setting, an edge as a run, contained defender, I think he can also move in and kind of play a role similar to what you see, some of the defensive ends on that team play, like, maybe Cansey or Logan Hall, right? So that kind of a role.
Gotcha. Now, with Latu, obviously, besides the medicals, besides everything that jumps out when you watch him on tape, what are some things that maybe if you're just reading through scouting analysis of different people that you've seen on tape that kind of jumps out to you that might be just something small that might not get mentioned in a scouting report from, Lance Zierlein or one of the guys that, Trevor Sycamore, one of these guys, Dane Brugler around the league?
I think we talk about pure brute force sometimes. It's not a huge part of my evaluation for an edge rusher, but it is something that I do take a look at. And what I mean by brute force is just having pure power at times. And I don't think that he necessarily has a lot of that. That's why I talked about building some of the lower half a little bit more to generate more bull, more power. I think that's one thing. He's going to get bullied by brutes a little bit. I think when you look at the game that he played against Oregon State and Thalys Fuaga, you kind of saw that he can, when you've got a bigger guy that can move a little bit better, he's going to struggle against that at times. It's going to take him a little bit longer to figure out how he's going to win, because those first couple quarters he struggled. Then he kind of started to realize, okay, here's how he's going to set, here's how he's going to attack me, and he figured out a plan. So that's a positive, but he's not going to really deal with brutes necessarily well. Outside of that, maybe some space defending he could improve on a little bit better too. So you get him in space one-on-one when he is asked to drop into coverage. Yeah, he can hold the passing lane fine, but I think closing on a defender or a ball carrier when the screen is thrown in front of him or whatever that is, that check down, he could close a little bit better. I didn't see that necessarily from him. And that's really just more of a pursuit angle and just knowing how to operate in space, close, take away the guy's opportunity. If you have the right angle and you close with speed, there's nothing a ball carrier can do. So those are a couple of things. They're very small, very minute, that he could kind of figure out and get better at.
So this is, noticeably very deep draft at certain positions. Edge rusher is not one of them. There's really only 3 guys, maybe 4 if you include Chop Robinson. But, there's been, lack of production tested out of the gym. Lack of production has been a stall point. I think he's starting to kind of move up a little bit in the draft. And there's Robinson is another one who's kind of interesting as well. Can he be a 3-4 edge? Is he more just a defensive end in a traditional 4-3? I think those are some questions that some teams will have, and we'll see if he sneaks into the latter half of the first round. But what I'm getting at is in such a shallow class for the edge rushers. I've seen Field Yates just put out his mock draft 2.0, and he had Latu going to the Bucs. He had Verse going after them. And I know it's so deep at offensive line, and obviously 7 quarterbacks to potentially go in the first, and maybe even 10 wide receivers. So we add those up, and you can see why the edge rushers. But why do you think this year is a year where with only 3, 4, maybe 5 borderline edge rushers at such a premium position that the Bucs might have a shot at a guy like Latu, or maybe even a guy like Verse?
Well, there's 2 things here. First off is you want to protect your quarterback. So the quarterbacks go high, but you want to protect your quarterback as well. But that's just second, step to team building, in my opinion. So there's it's a really great offensive tackle class. So that's going to continue to push them down the board as well. And then you've got the whole, defender rule changes that are going into place, the hip drop tackle, whatever that is. I still haven't figured that out, what that is, but that's been banned. So, now the game is becoming harder every year for defenders. And I think that is starting to affect their draft stock a little bit too, because it's like, well, we can't take these guys that can't wrap up properly, that we have to teach, simple technique to. It pushes guys down the board a little bit more because the game is so much harder for defenders and puts that premium on the offensive players that are going to create in space.
All right, last one. Give me one reason why the Bucs should take Latu at 26 and one reason why maybe they shouldn't.
I think we talked about edge rushers and just how that could really benefit and bolster the defense and getting a premier guy. If you think that Latu is your premier guy, you got to take him. Now, with some of the other things they could address, they brought back a lot of guys, did a really good job within the re-signing period. But with that, with some of the other things that need to be addressed on the team, and with the positioning that they're in toward the bottom of the first round, there's a lot of different talent. So it really just kind of depends. Hey, where is your premium? What do you think you need to protect? Is it you got your quarterback? That's answered. How do you feel about your line? Who's off the board on the line? Some of these wide receivers and quarterbacks push you a guy that you feel really good about on the offensive line. So I think if you've got those questions answered, go ahead and take them. If you don't, and there's an opportunity for you to make your offensive line better, you got to do it.
Gotcha. All right, John, thank you so much for stopping by. We'll be back again with another draft profile breakdown. Maybe we'll stick on the defensive side before we go offensive for our next one. And again, thanks for stopping on the show. Where can people find you? And we'll wrap it up.
On the Sick Podcast, Draft Vogel, breaking down all things draft, and on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it now, at Draft Vogel.
Awesome. John, thank you so much for popping in here, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, JC.
Awesome. We're out.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Pirate Parlay on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.